Thank you. I'm really excited to be here. I was listening when Neil was talking about crazy kids. I thought about myself because I'm an entrepreneur myself and came up through the cable TV business. I actually worked for MTV back when it started out, but I ended up starting the classic garage startup in 1993 with 3 other partners of mine. And we were so garagey that my partner said to me, we don't have a business plan, but we're smart guys, we're going to figure out something to do. And that's literally how we got started. And we did everything on internally generated funds. We never borrowed any money. We never took any investors. I'm happy to say in 2000, 7 years later, we sold our company to an Israeli company. A few years later, it was flipped to, our companies were flipped to BMC for $150 million in cash. So we did all right on our no business plan business. We ended up with 2 companies, as a matter of fact. But the reason I bring this up is during this whole period, rather than going to conferences and reading books about business and stuff, I was spending all my time hanging out with Trappist monks, mostly mopping floors and doing things like that. And my attorney at the time had some concerns about my sanity as a CEO of a company working its way up. So I have about 30 minutes here to tell you about why I think my time with the monks was well spent, and that you ought to read my damn book so you can find out why that this really worked in my business, not just for the monks. I do want to start real quickly by talking about one of the critical things for the monastery and the Benedictine, the rule of St. Benedict, which governs all monasteries. One of the critical components, and I get into it in the book about why it has a business application, but it's hospitality and the importance of hospitality. Every monastery has to be very hospitable to anybody that comes looking for solace or anything else for that matter. And I've really found that here in Portland. This is my first trip ever to Portland. I really want to thank Corella Taylor and Starbucker St. Maria over there for all their help in bringing me, and especially some little detail. You know, Terry came to the airport and picked me up. Now, I've been speaking for many, many years, and the vast majority of places, as a matter of fact, I can't remember the last time somebody picked me up at the airport. It's usually get a cab and get to your hotel or something like that. And to me, I went away to graduate school in Minnesota a few years ago, and they talked about Minnesota nice, and I've really picked that up here in Portland. So I actually was only half jokingly to some of the ladies yesterday, I said, if I could just find a wife, I think I'll stay in Portland. But I want to illustrate that with a story from the monastery. I've been going down there for 18 years, and I'd go as a monastic guest, which means I actually live with the monks, get up at 3 in the morning with them, go to church with them 8 times a day, and work with them. And one summer when I was there for several weeks or a month or so, Brother John, who runs all the work, asked me to take this other monk, Father Ed, to work every day because he had a bad knee. He asked me to drive him to work. So I was driving him to work, and he was working with me. And I gradually found out that Father Ed wasn't from that monastery. He was actually from a monastery in Georgia called Conyers. Mepkin Abbey is where I go. So I asked him, I said, why are you here? He said, oh, well, I'm in exile. They kicked me out and told me to go learn my lesson and then come back. So I said, Father Ed, well, what did you do wrong? He said, well, I was the guest master at Conyers. He said, and he started telling me about this phenomenon. He called them monastic bums. These are people that find out that the monasteries are big on hospitality, and they just come to eat and sleep and take advantage, or at least according to Father Ed, that they take advantage. He said, so anyway, this monastic bum came for like the 5th time in the last 3 months. And when he came in, I gave him heck and told him to hit the road. So the abbot calls me in and he says, what did you do? And he said, well, he's a monastic bum. I told him to hit the road. He says, don't you understand, Father Ed, that we treat everyone like Christ, as Christ? And he said, Father, that's exactly what I did. He walked through the door. He said, Christ, you again? And I told him to hit the road. He said, so now I'm here doing my penance. Eventually, the spirit of hospitality prevailed, so he ended up going back to Conyers where he is now. But so I want to start with a quick anecdote from one of my clients a few years ago. It's more than a few now, but I asked him one time. He's a serial entrepreneur, extremely successful. He was running at the time a rapidly growing entrepreneurial startup. It almost was a mid-sized company at the time. And I asked him, I said, what is your job description? And he said, well, if you followed me around all day, you'd probably think I do a lot of stuff. But I only have one job. I build passion. My job is to provide the whys so my people can figure out the hows. He said, people say talent is in short supply. Talent is not in short supply. Passion is in short supply. Passionate people can accomplish anything. The task of management is to create extraordinary organizations out of ordinary people. And passionate, ordinary people can get almost anything done. He said, once passion is in place, my job is to make sure that everybody takes vacation and I stay the hell out of the way. And to me, I think that's this is my experience in business my entire life. That when you have the passion, but how do you get it? How do you keep it? Where does it come from? And these have been things, of course, I came up in sales, especially, where does all this come from? So I'm going to tell you about the most passionate human being in business that I ever met. When I used to spend this back in 1997, I was spending the whole summer at Mepkin Abbey, and what we were doing at that time, they had 40,000 chickens laying eggs. And my job at the monastery egg house every day was all the eggs would go through this conveyor, they'd be graded, they'd be cleaned, and they'd come spitting off the line. And some would be large, extra large, medium, small, and they'd come off real fast. And my job was to grab them and put them into cartons, big cartons. Small is here, the medium's here, the big, fast is extra large, and keep them off the floor if I could. And when I worked all day long, they were with a guy named Father Malachi. And Father Malachi was well into his 80s. He was kind of stooped over, very mild-mannered. He had a beard, soft blue eyes, prayer-worn hands, as I like to say. And what his job was to take a cardboard box that was flat, square it, and just put a strap around it so the tops wouldn't flip over, and make sure that I always had these boxes available to me. And when they got filled, I put them on a cart and I threw them in the refrigerator, And that's all this man did all day long, every day. And I said, so as I got to know him, all I saw is a normal guy, an ordinary monk doing an ordinary job, a simple monk doing a simple task. As a matter of fact, one day I said to him half teasingly, I said, Father Malachi, I noticed that you always eat 2 dishes of ice cream when it's served in the dining hall. And he said, well, I used to eat 3. But then the abbot took me aside and he said, Father Malachi, do you think a man your age should be eating so much ice cream? So now I only eat 2. But then one day he came up to me for no reason at all, and he said that some years previously, somebody had donated all these boxes of books written in French, theology tomes written in French. And the abbot had called Father Malachi in and said, could you read these and then write summaries of them in English for the library? And Father Malachi said to me, he said, well, the abbot thought I spoke French, but I didn't. But he's so busy, I didn't bring it up. I just stayed up late for a couple months, taught myself French, read the books, and wrote the summaries. Holy mackerel, Here I thought this guy was as simple. He taught himself French in order to do this. And little by little I found out he had taught himself music so he could lead the choir when there was nobody there. The cantor wasn't there. I found out he had taught himself how to be a priest on his own because they had needed a priest. So I found out that this man was extremely accomplished, and yet all he did every day was put these boxes together. Then one day I got a telephone call that Father Malachi was dead. And I rushed all the way down to the monastery. It's about a 5-hour drive from where I live in Raleigh, and they're in Charleston, South Carolina. Got there just in time for the funeral. And Father Francis, the abbot, was giving the eulogy. And he said that only about 2 weeks before that, Malachi had been complaining of pain. They took him to the hospital and found out he was just riddled with cancer. And they were surprised he was still alive. So it fell to Francis as the abbot to go to the hospital and tell Father Malachi that he had very little time left. And Francis said when he got to the hospital and told Malachi, he said Malachi didn't even blink an eye. He just leaned forward and stroked Francis on the arm and said, that's all right. And Francis just fell apart on the altar, started weeping on the altar, and couldn't finish his eulogy. Afterwards, they asked me to lead the funeral procession to the cemetery. And so I had a crucifix and I led the procession. In the monastic tradition, they don't use a casket. They take him to they took Father Malachi there in a casket. Then they covered his face with a handkerchief. There's straps. They pulled the body out and they put him into a coffinless grave. We all threw a handful of dirt in, and then they backfilled the grave. And as we were walking away, I was walking with Brother Robert, and I told Brother Robert how amazed I was that this man had died comforting someone else rather than trying to seek comfort for himself. And Father Robert just smiled and gave me a hug and turned away, and then he turned back to me and he said, "You know, everybody wants to die like a Trappist. Nobody wants to live like one." And so to me, I think when I look back to my genesis of how I got interested, because I didn't go to the monastery, obviously I started going in 1996. I wasn't going down there because I was interested in their business acumen. As a matter of fact, I never associated them, like most people, with their business acumen. But as I was there longer and longer, I think it was triggered by this whole thing with Father Malachi. Because I started to ask myself questions, just because of where I come from, and I was an entrepreneur myself at the time. You know, how do these guys, they're 70 years old on average, they work 4 hours a day, they work in silence, they get up at 3 o'clock in the morning, they work 8 hours, they go to 8 church services a day. Their real mission is to be contemplatives, prayer, and yet they have a fertilizer business, a timber business, a mushroom business, an egg business, a gift shop, a conference center. And all of them are fabulously profitable, fabulously successful. People are lining up to buy the products. When I started looking at other monasteries, the same thing. These are mostly commodity products. They could charge anything they wanted and get the money for it. These are really competitive businesses that any first-year MBA student would say, exit, get out of this business. But people would do anything to get a hold of Mepkin Abbey's eggs, for example. So I started asking myself these questions. You know, what makes these guys so successful? Long story short is I ended up writing just what I consider a white paper, more for my own curiosity, that ended up in Forbes magazine, or Forbes.com, was extremely successful, and it led to the book, Business Secrets of the Trappist Monks. But I want to try and answer as quickly in the few minutes that I have left some of the findings that are based on my book. And again, I want to emphasize that what I do in my book is show how each one of these things I used it in my own business to build my own successful business. First of all, if the monastic motto is ora et labora, which means pray and work. Now, everybody thinks about the ora side. There's tons and tons of books. There's libraries full of books about the ora, the prayer part. But there's nothing about the labora side when I started looking into doing this book. Yet they're equally important, ora et labora. As a matter of fact, for a Trappist monk, work is a form of prayer. Prayer is a form of monk. They don't even make the distinction. Work and prayer are almost indistinguishable to them. And so they're both extremely important. And a lot of people, I just saw a review in the Wall Street Journal, as a matter of fact, they brought it up again, because it was a review of a book, and I'd like to get a hold of the book, and I forgot to write it down. But again, another book saying that the monasteries invented capitalism, not Adam Smith. The rule of St. Benedict says every monastery has to be self-supporting. Every monastery has to be in business. And they've been doing this for over 1,500 years. So one of the big things that I found in my research, which really captivated me, was what in USA Today. Because the monks of St. Sixtus in Belgium make what the Wall Street Journal calls the best beer in the world. And they only sell it twice a year. There's no labels on the bottles. There's no advertising. You can only buy 2 cases, and literally people line up for miles. The roads are choked for as far as the eye can see, people trying to get their two cases of this beer. So this guy from USA goes over and talks to him and everything and does some research. He comes back and he says, piety, not profit, is what these monks seek. They break every rule in Business 101's book except attention to quality. And that just may be the secret to their success. So let's break that down for a second. First of all, let's take the quality part. Now, most of all, and probably the guy who wrote the article, when he was thinking about quality, he was thinking about a high-quality product. Yes, the eggs that Mepkin produced were extremely high quality. Everything, the brand that the Trappists have, the jellies, whatever it is going to be very high quality. But there's something even bigger, because there's a qualitative versus a quantitative approach to business generally. Going back to 1911, Frederick Taylor came out with his books, The Principle of Scientific Management. And ever since then, we've been trying to turn business into a science, trying to get the people quotient out of it, so we can just make it into a machine. And I'm not against the quantitative approach to business, and believe me, I've done my share of analysis and spreadsheets and research and all that kind of stuff, and so do the monks. But there's also the qualitative. What is the qualitative? It's purpose and mission. It's people. It's all these so-called softer values. Authenticity, which is a big buzzword in business now. The monks are great at authenticity. You know, authentic brands, authentic products, authentic leadership. We hear that all around today, you know. Well, that's nothing new to the monks. They've been turning out authentic brands, products, and people for 1,500 years. It's an ancient yet emergent thing. So to me, the first one of their secrets is the qualitative aspect, paying tremendous attention. I say that they do everything they do, that right down to the way they prepare the food for each other with a prayerful attitude. Go back to Father Malachi. Everything, from the way he was opening those boxes for me and everything else he did were Father Friend, and all of it. And what is the most secret to this qualitative? I call it service and selflessness. Everything the monks do is about serving something bigger than themselves. You mentioned a higher purpose, some kind of higher purpose. I call it service and selflessness. So that's the number one. The other part is take the piety part. So the piety part piety comes from the Latin word for duty. So it's not just that the monks are dutiful according to God. They see that everything that they do, especially in their business, is a sacred duty, a duty to their customers, a duty to their lay employees, a duty to the government regulators, a duty to each other in community. Everything is done that way. And guess what? When you start doing everything that way, you get pretty good at it. And customers start coming back, and people like to work for you. And people get excited. And then you get guys like me who go down like I just did for 3 weeks over Christmas. All I do these days, because they're in the mushroom business, they must not think I know anything about mushrooms or ever could be taught, because they got out of eggs and they're in the mushroom, because all I do now is mop. And Brother Nick said to me, he said, you know, you might be interested in knowing, he says, but you've gone through 2 cases of mopping fluid since you've been here. That's how much mopping. And I feel privileged to be allowed to mop their floors. I don't mop my own floors. But I go down there, and I'd probably pay them to let me mop theirs. And if you have people like that, and if you have customers like that, if you have people like that in your business. So if you have this idea of an attention to the qualitative aspects and the duty aspects, we don't like duty anymore. When's the last time you heard anybody talking about duty? Nobody has duty anymore. That's the kind of stuff that got people into wars or whatever. We don't have duty. You know, we're supposed to be self-determination. So I want to break this down further in the last few minutes that I have here to the 3 main things, how they bring this stuff to bear and how you can bring it to bear, or should. Number 1 is a high overarching mission worthy of being selflessly served. You know, my mentor, Louis R. Mobley, he was the founder of the IBM Executive School. He ran it from 1956 to 1966. And during that time, for some of you old-timers like me, you might be old enough to remember that these were the guys that turned IBM into the most admired and most successful corporation that maybe to this day the world has ever seen in the 60s and the 70s. And he used to say, profit is not the purpose of a business. Profit is the way in which we measure, as a yardstick, how well we're executing against the mission. Mission is everything. Now, I want to give you an example out of the tech business of how important mission is. I grew up in the software business in the 80s and the early 90s. And again, some of you might remember. Does anybody remember Lotus? Does anybody remember VisiCalc? Does anybody remember WordStar? Anybody remember WordPerfect? Does anybody remember Netscape? All of those companies, excuse me, I should have turned this off. What happened to those companies? Well, the short answer is they all went out of business. But why did they go out of business? Because what did they think their mission was? They all thought, WordStar and WordPerfect thought that they were competing against each other as standalone software products, and their mission was to churn out new features as fast as they could, to keep enhancing their word processing ability so they could stay ahead of their competition. So did Lotus, so did VisiCalc, all these companies. No. Microsoft said, no. That's not what people really care about. They don't need to have the absolute best word processing package. They need word processing that talks to spreadsheets, that talks to browsers, that talks to, and everybody else is going to have it so I can trade files. And so they put together Microsoft Office. And within no time, in the blink of an eye, it seemed at the time, those companies were all out of business. And where does this come to? Where does the service and selflessness aspect? Why did WordStar and these people go out? Because they didn't care about the customer. They weren't really caring about, they weren't listening. They weren't paying attention to what people really wanted and what people really needed. They were too busy thinking about what they wanted and what they needed and what they thought. Their mission was wrong. Again, let's take Apple with Steve Jobs. You know, I think Steve Jobs is one of the most selfless human beings. He's supposed to be a bastard to work for and all that kind of. I think he was a tremendously selfless guy. Why? How do I know that? Because he had an incredible knack, not just for providing products that people wanted, because as Henry Ford said, if I ask people what they want, they'd all say they wanted a faster horse. He said, I don't give people what they want, I give them what I know they should want. And Jobs had that incredible sense of ability to put himself in the other person's shoes and know what the market wanted before the market itself knew that it wanted it, and create products of imagination. And this is where mission becomes so important. And this is what the monks are so good at, because what are the monks' mission? Serve God, serve each other in community, serve their fellow man. You know, it's a cliche, there's no I in team. Well, there's no I in that mission. And actually, I say that their mission, but guess what? Did anybody notice there's nothing about business in the mission at all? So everything this attitude of selflessness spills over into their business. So I actually say, provocatively, they're not actually in business at all. It just spills over. So what happens, their success, their profits, the greatness that they do in business is a byproduct. It's a trailing indicator. It's not the purpose. It falls out. And I've seen this again and again. And I have this thing with Warren Buffett's annual report I was reading on the airplane on the way out. You know, and to me, everything he talks about in his annual reports could come right out of a monk's mouth. So the next thing, what do the monks have? The next thing that the monks have is what I call personal transformation. On a personal level, why does a person go to the monastery? They go to the monastery to be transformed from a selfish person into a selfless person. The unique vantage point, and I make a big argument, this is where I get into the Devil Wears Prada and the movies and everything, which I don't have time to get into today, but in my book, I'm making the argument, you only think you want selfishness. What you really want is selflessness. That what we really want as human beings, we're happiest when we are giving ourselves away to something bigger than ourselves. When we're pulled up and out of our selfish concerns. When we're moved to sacrifice. We're happiest when we're sacrificing. You know? When we're doing stuff for other people, we get more pleasure out of doing it. And again, this whole idea of selfless service is not alien on the individual level either. Let's think about it. I come up in sales. Every great salesman knows that the more he forgets about himself, forgets about his product, forgets about his quota, forgets about his commissions, and fanatically focuses on serving his customers' needs, the commissions take care of themselves. It's the byproduct. It's the trailing indicator. It's not the point. Let's think about a company. When a company fanatically focuses on delighting their customers, profits take care of themselves. And perhaps most instrumental, what is the purpose of leadership? You don't become a leader to make yourself successful. The greatest leaders know that the purpose of leadership is to make someone else successful. You don't mark your success in leadership by how many promotions you got. It's how many promotions you got other people. Somebody just told me, I read it somewhere just the last couple of days. They said when you're interviewing, the number one question to ask the guy is how many people have you gotten promoted? And if he can't rattle off 6 or 7 stories, boom, 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 you're interviewing with the wrong guy. But guess what happens? The paradox is the more people you get promoted, the more people you get promoted, the faster you get promoted. Your promotions, is the trailing indicator. It's the thing that's the byproduct. And I'm saying that the closer, and I've seen this in my own career to an absolute T, that the closer I've come to getting literally far more pleasure out of seeing someone else succeed than I get out of my own success, the more successful I've become. And this is something I learned from the monks. Of course, you don't learn it, you have to become it. It's a process a change of being, a change of heart. This whole thing, monks go to the monastery, men go to the monastery to experience a change of heart, not a change of head. The best I can really do today with you guys is maybe change a few heads. The work involved is changing as a change of heart. The final thing, the third thing is community. You know, Jack Kennedy said in 1960, I wonder if anybody could get away with saying this today. But John F. Kennedy said, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you could do for your country. It's probably the vast majority of people that are old enough, it's one of the few quotes from a president that anybody can remember from an inauguration. That's how moving it was when it happened. But could anybody really say that today? They'd be laughed down, probably. But the point is the monks lived that way. Community comes first. Ask not what the community can do for me. That's why Father Malachi is learning French at night. I mean, the guy gets up at 3 o'clock in the morning and goes to bed at 8. To stay up for a couple hours and study French, it was no mean sacrifice on his part. But he's thinking all the time, what can I do for the community? How can I be of service? How can I help? And when you have a community of people that are dedicated to that, and instead of looking over their shoulders, worrying about where the knife in the back is coming from, guess what? The team is pretty successful. The other thing I noticed about their dedication to community, and I saw this in my sales career, the greatest motivator, I tried all kinds of different stuff in sales. What is the greatest motivator that I've ever seen? Peer pressure. By far. You know, if you watch these shows like I do, I'm addicted to the military channel, and I watch these shows about Taro and everything. These guys come on again and again and again. Why do we fight? Why are we willing to die? We want to fight for our buddies. We're not fighting for God. We're not fighting for country. We fight for our buddies. And when you get a team of people together that believe that they're fighting for the community, in other words. And when you get that peer pressure, you get super performance out of people. It's the esprit de corps that matters so much. And to me, it's the community aspects of the monastery that keeps the mission front and center, that keeps reminding people, because what do we do with most missions? We come up with some motherhood and brotherhood idea, and then we put it in a drawer and forget about it. No, in the monastery, they're constantly, this community is bringing that thing. And it does most of the heavy lifting on this personal transformation from selfishness to selflessness, because the peer pressure helps push it across. And when you get high overarching mission, an urge to personal transformation, and community together, they start feeding back on each other till you get what we call in business culture. So the critical reason why the monks are so successful is the culture that they have. And I say in Business Secrets of the Trappist Monk, the monks don't have a mission. They are their mission. They're living their mission. They don't get together once a year or twice a year and somebody, drum roll please, somebody open the magic box and take the mission statement out and remind us of what it is. They're constantly reinforcing, constantly on it. And when you put these three things together, you have a tremendously successful organization. The final point I want to make, is I talk about looking back at my own life. And I talk in my book about how I went from being a businessman to an entrepreneur, from an entrepreneur into a writer. And I actually won the Templeton Prize in 2004 for an essay that I wrote, which is the first thing I ever wrote in my life, which was another story about the monks, Brother John. And I actually won $100,000 for that. And when I look back over everything I've ever done, it's all happy accidents. I like to say I've never had a plan for my life, because I've been all over the place and lucked into almost everything. But I always had this mission. And what was my mission? I didn't have the words for it when I was 20 years old. But I wanted to live my life with meaning and purpose. And I think the way I informally defined that, I want to become the best human being I can possibly be. I don't go to the monastery so I can be better in business. I use the business so I can be better at the values that I'm learning at the monastery. A way to put into practice the higher purpose. But I say, my book is not religious. I don't talk about it. I don't make any pitch. I don't know whether God is even mentioned. But the one thing that I say in there is you can call it grace if you're so inclined, or you can call it luck if you're not. But there's something magical about this Trappist way of approaching business and life that seems to attract success. And I illustrate, I see that in my life, my own life. I said, Trappist monks don't just know how to make success happen. They also know how to let success happen. And that may be the deepest and most profound secret that they have to share with us if we're interested in listening. So, to me, I've just seen this happening in my life so often in my own life. And so my biggest reason for writing my book is hoping that I can help bring some of this magic into your life and your business ventures as well. So I want to leave you with two of the most important points of my book. Number one is it is in your own self-interest to forget your self-interest. The more selflessly you can behave, the more successful you're going to be in every area of your life. It takes some faith to try that out, but at least it's something I can guarantee you. Try it and see if it works. The second big point is, and again I come back to Warren Buffett, I get sad sometimes. I read there's so much wisdom, the 11 principles that he said. I thought selflessness, he says, because of fiduciary responsibility, one of his main principles, he says, I won't share with you what stocks I like or don't like. But he said, I feel a moral obligation to share with everybody who wants my philosophy of life and my philosophy of how to pick stocks. He said, why? Because my mentor, Ben Graham, was generous with me. And everything about, so much of Buffett. So what I always say is, people like the monks and people like Warren Buffett are not successful despite their high principles and their high sense of ethics and morals. They're successful because of them. This selflessness is not a hindrance. It's not something that you got to do, oh crap, it's going to hold me back, but I guess if I want to go to heaven, I got to do it. This is the greatest lubricant that you can possibly have. Thank you so much.